I never thought I'd be writing one of these stories, but here we are. Living in Oakwood Estates for the past 5 years had been mostly peaceful until Deborah Wilson, or as the neighborhood had taken to calling her behind her back, Karen, was elected as the HOA president 6 months ago. From day one, she made it clear that her mission wasn't to improve our community, but rather to impose her vision of perfection on every single house, lawn, and resident. I'm Thomas Miller, and I've been a county surveyor for over 15 years. It's not exactly the kind of job that comes up in casual conversation at neighborhood barbecues, so most of my neighbors, including Deborah, just knew me as the quiet guy in the blue house at the end of Maple Street. My profession involves precision, legal documentation, and a thorough understanding of property boundaries, skills that would become surprisingly relevant in my dealings with our neighborhood tyrant. The trouble started when Deborah, the HOA president, decided that all house numbers in our neighborhood needed to be standardized for emergency services. According to the letter slipped under everyone's door, all house numbers needed to be black, 5 inches tall, and in a specific font called Montserrat, that apparently was the only acceptable typeface for the discerning HOA community. That's interesting, I thought to myself, considering the County Emergency Services guidelines specifically recommend contrasting colors based on house paint, numbers between 4 to 6 inches, and legibility over specific fonts. But I figured this wasn't a hill worth dying on, so I complied and ordered the new numbers. 2 weeks after installing my new house numbers, exactly to specifications I might add, I received a violation notice. According to Deborah, my house numbers were improperly placed and needed to be moved 3 inches to the right for aesthetic alignment with neighborhood standards. I checked our HOA bylaws that evening and found absolutely nothing about number placement beyond visible from the street. I decided to call Deborah directly rather than engage in a paper war. "Hello, Deborah. This is Thomas from 4876 Maple Street. I received a violation notice about my house numbers, but I can't find anything in the bylaws about specific placement requirements." Her voice came through the phone with that sickly sweet tone that barely masked her condescension. "Thomas, as HOA president, it's my responsibility to maintain community standards. The board has decided that visual alignment is important for our neighborhood's appeal. You have 14 days to comply or face a $50 fine. Could you point me to where this requirement is documented? I've read through our bylaws pretty carefully. The board has discretionary authority on aesthetic matters. It was discussed in the last meeting, which you didn't attend." Her tone suggested that my absence was practically a criminal offense. "I'd like to see the meeting minutes then, please. They'll be posted on the community website within 30 days, as per usual procedure." She paused before adding, "But the violation stands. 14 days, Thomas." I hung up feeling that unique combination of frustration and disbelief that only an encounter with a power-tripping HOA president can produce. As a surveyor, precision and documentation were literally my professional standards. Deborah's arbitrary demands went against everything I stood for, but I also knew that fighting an HOA could be a lengthy, unpleasant process. After a week of deliberation, I decided I would not move my house numbers 3 arbitrary inches to the right. They were clearly visible from the street, installed according to the written specifications provided, and compliant with County Emergency Service recommendations. I drafted a polite but firm email to Deborah explaining this and citing the relevant bylaws and county guidelines. She never responded to my email. Instead, 15 days after the initial violation notice, I received a fine notification for $50 for failure to comply with HOA directives. This was getting ridiculous, but I was prepared for it. I wrote a formal appeal to the HOA board, again citing the bylaws and requesting a hearing at the next board meeting. What I wasn't prepared for was what happened next. I returned home from a 3-day work trip, conducting a major survey for a new county development, only to find that my house numbers had been changed. Not only had they been moved to the right as Deborah had demanded, but they had also been replaced with a completely different style, still Montserrat font, but now with a decorative backdrop that wasn't part of the original approved design. I was livid. Someone had physically come onto my property and modified my house without permission. This wasn't just a petty HOA violation anymore. This was trespassing and unauthorized modification of property. I immediately checked my doorbell. Camera footage, and sure enough, there was Deborah herself, accompanied by the HOA's architectural compliance officer, a retired dentist named Phil, who seemed to follow Deborah around like a lost puppy, removing my house numbers and installing new ones. Instead of confronting Deborah immediately, I decided to be strategic. First, I documented everything, taking photos of the unauthorized numbers, downloading and saving the security footage, and printing out copies of all previous correspondence, including my appeal that had apparently been ignored. Then I did something I probably should have done from the beginning. I pulled the official county property records for our entire neighborhood. As a county surveyor, I had access to these records as part of my job. What I found was interesting, to say the least. According to official county documents, the decorative house number plaques that Deborah was now forcing on everyone weren't just aesthetic choices. They were actually shifting the official marking of property lines by nearly 4 inches in most cases. In a suburban neighborhood where property disputes sometimes came down to inches, this was no small matter. The next day was the monthly HOA meeting. I hadn't planned to attend. These meetings usually consisted of Deborah talking for an hour about other people's lawn care shortcomings while everyone else checked their phones. But now I had a purpose. I gathered my documentation, put on my county surveyor badge that I rarely wore outside of work, and headed to the community center. When I walked in, Deborah was already in full swing, pointing to a PowerPoint slide showing a sad-looking hedge that apparently belonged to the Johnsons on Oak Drive. She paused mid-sentence when she saw me, her eyes flickering briefly to the badge on my chest before she composed herself. "Thomas, how nice of you to finally join us for a meeting. We are currently discussing landscape compliance, but we can address individual violations during the open forum at the end." I smiled pleasantly. "Actually, Deborah, I'm here in my official capacity as county surveyor for Westland County." I let that sink in for a moment, watching as confusion, then recognition, then the first flicker of concern crossed her face. "I need to address an urgent matter regarding property boundaries and unauthorized modifications that could have legal implications for the HOA." The room, which had been filled with the low murmur of bored homeowners, suddenly went quiet. Deborah's smile remained fixed, but her knuckles whitened around her pointer. "I'm afraid that's not on our agenda for today, Thomas. As I said, individual concerns can be—" "This isn't an individual concern, Deborah," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "This is a county issue. The unauthorized modification of property markers, including house numbers that serve as reference points in county documents, is a violation of Westland County Code 5.3.7. Phil, the architectural compliance officer, cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should hear what Thomas has to say, Deborah." "Oh, now you find your backbone, Phil," I thought, but kept it to myself. I walked to the front of the room, connected my laptop to the projector, and displayed the county property records side by side with photos of the original house numbers and the ones Deborah had installed. 3 days ago, while I was away on official county business, my house numbers were removed and replaced without my consent. My doorbell camera footage shows that this was done by Deborah Wilson and Phil Andrews. I played the short clip, and the room filled with uncomfortable murmurs. What may seem like a cosmetic change is actually a modification of property markers. That shifts the reference points used in county surveys by approximately 4 inches. I clicked to the next slide showing the county code. Modifying property markers without proper permits and without the supervision of a licensed surveyor is a violation of county code that carries a minimum fine of $500 per instance. Deborah's face had gone from pink to white to a mottled red. "This is absurd. They're just house numbers. The HOA has full authority over exterior aesthetic decisions." "Aesthetics, yes," I agreed. "Property markers, no. And as it happens, I've discovered 17 instances of similar unauthorized modifications throughout Oakwood Estates in the past month alone." I let that number hang in the air for a moment. "That's potentially 8,500. in county fines, not including the cost of having a surveyor, that would be me or one of my colleagues, come out to verify and correct each marker. The room erupted into concerned conversations. Someone in the back shouted, "I can't afford a $500 fine because Karen wanted my house numbers to look prettier." Deborah slammed her hand on the table. "My name is Deborah, not Karen. And this is nothing but intimidation. The HOA has the right to—" "The HOA," I cut in, "does not have the right to supersede county regulations. Now, as a courtesy to my neighbors, I'm prepared to file this as a single violation attributed to the HOA board rather than individual homeowners, provided that all modified house numbers are restored to their original positions within 7 days. Phil raised his hand timidly. "And if we comply, what would the fine be? For a first offense reported voluntarily and promptly corrected, the county might reduce it to the minimum single violation fine of $500. Deborah looked like she might explode. "This is extortion. You can't just come in here with your little badge and threaten us. The HOA Treasury is not paying any ridiculous county fine for house numbers." One of the other board members, Janet from across the street, who until now had been Deborah's loyal supporter, slowly raised her hand. "Actually, Deborah, according to our bylaws, any fines incurred by the HOA as a result of board members' actions are the responsibility of those board members personally, not the HOA Treasury." The room went completely silent as everyone turned to look at Deborah, whose face was now cycling through colors like a traffic light. That's not... "You can't," Janet continued, her voice gaining strength. "Furthermore, I move that we immediately vote to rescind the house number standardization requirement and authorize emergency funds to restore all modified house numbers to their original state to avoid additional county penalties." "I second that motion," called another board member, followed quickly by others. Deborah looked around desperately, but the tide had turned. The vote was quick and unanimous, with only Deborah and Phil abstaining. As the meeting adjourned, Deborah cornered me, her voice a furious whisper. "This isn't over, Thomas. You had no right to ambush me like this at a public meeting." I smiled politely. "I'm just doing my job, Deborah. County regulations exist for a reason. Oh, and you'll be receiving the official violation notice in the mail. $500 payable within 30 days. I patted my badge. "And just so you know, interfering with a county official in the performance of their duties is a separate violation with its own set of fines." The look on Deborah's face as she realized that her petty power play was going to cost her $500 out of her own pocket was something I wish I could have framed and hung on my wall, right next to my properly positioned house numbers.